Now, I'm going to turn it over to our favorite delegate from the 51st, Delegate Hala Ayala. Yeah. Are y'all excited? We got Beto.
I'm Delegate Hala Ayala, and I represent Prince William's 51st, part of that blue wave that started a tsunami across America. And we want it to continue. We are so proud to have you here in Prince William County. It is enlightening for me just to have a presidential candidate in Prince William, that we are on the map. You put us on the map. Thank you. As you may be aware, we are a growing community, mostly majority minority community, and representative of the direction that this country is moving towards. A country that is inclusive of all families and values that we recognize here in Prince William County. And it's past time that our elected officials and our policies represent just that. This November, we are on the brink of a pivotal election. Everything is at stake. As you know, Virginia has all 100 seats up, board, school, every seat is up for election. So we need you to get out the vote and make sure that you get folks to vote. Everything is at stake. And then in 2020, we have even bigger stakes in November. We have the presidential election. And it's going to take all of our grassroots efforts to really fundamentally make change and put forth that, that roll up your sleeves, let's get it done type of mentality to the forefront. And now, a man who needs no introduction, and probably one of the most talented musicians in El Paso, Beto O'Rourke. In all seriousness, though, before we get into Beto's speech, you probably already know him. He's part of the largest binational communities in the Western Hemisphere. He has led for 2 decades a community, one of the safest communities in America. And his leadership is deeply rooted in the sacred values of El Paso, that respecting and embracing our differences is what we do here in Prince William County. So these are recognizable values. Now, this guy right here, this man right here, is running for president. He's going to take those values to the White House. He's going to take these values to our country and bring them to the forefront. So without further ado, presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you for having us, Tony.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Delegate Ayala, thank you, and I had a chance to thank your colleague, Delegate Rome, as we came in, not just for the service that you are providing right now, but for the inspiration and the direction that you provided to us in Texas. Folks thought I was nuts to run for Senate in a deep red state against somebody who almost won the Republican presidential nomination, had been our sitting senator for the last 4 years. But when you did what you did in 2017, when you showed us that we show up for everyone, go everywhere, write nobody off, take no one for granted. Doesn't matter how reliably blue a given precinct or county, you showed up to listen. Didn't matter how red or rural, you showed up to listen, both with the courage of your convictions and a willingness to learn from those who you hope to serve. We saw in your victories here in the Commonwealth an opportunity for us in the state of Texas, and we employed the same strategy. We went to every single one of the 254 counties of Texas. We listened to everybody, learned a lot, and talked about the things that were most important to the future of that county, of our state, of our country. And that's just what you have been doing here. So kudos on not just winning these elections, but expanding Medicaid in the Commonwealth of Virginia. My understanding is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, more than 400,000 Virginians now have access to a doctor, can afford their prescriptions, to get mental health care help, thanks to these elections. If we want to pass paid family and medical leave, then we've got to win this election in 2019. If we want to invest in infrastructure, pay our teachers and public school educators a living wage so they don't work 2 and 3 jobs. If 12 years and a day after the massacre at Virginia Tech, we want to have universal background checks without a single loophole so that everyone's life is protected, then we've got to win these elections now in 2019. And my understanding is that the General Assembly, the Commonwealth Senate, hang in the balance of just a few races, returning you and Delegate Rome to power, helping others who are running right now to win their races. Bringing visibility, attention, focus, and resources into the Commonwealth is the best way to ensure that not only do we win these races, change the balance of power, but deliver for those who have placed us into these positions of public trust. I was talking to one of your members of Congress who also won an historic election in 2018, Abigail Spanberg, who sits on the Agriculture Committee and is fighting not just for farmers and growers to make a profit as they produce the food and fiber that feeds and clothes this country and the planet, but she mentioned to me an issue near and dear to my heart from living in Texas, where more than 50% of rural Texans cannot get online to look for a job, to finish their education, to start a business, to look for a date on Tinder or whatever dating platform they choose. She told me that in this president's budget, he has struck $350 million that was going to be used to partner with rural Virginia, rural Texas, rural America to ensure that all of us can get online, participate in our democracy, and participate in this economy. It reminded me of a moment in Silverton, Texas, where we were talking about broadband internet, and somebody stood up and he said, I'm old enough to have been in first grade in 1937 when Congressman LBJ and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt did not take pity on us or sympathize, but partnered with Silverton because we did not have electricity at the time. And though I was in first grade, I could not read by electric light just like the kids in Dallas or London or Tokyo or New York were able to do. But because they believed in us, thought that we were important, that we counted, listened to us, and delivered, the Rural Electrification Administration joined, partnered with a co-op in our community, and allowed us to learn just like the kids in the big cities. And he said, by the way, from that day forward, you can bet that my daddy was a yellow dog Democrat. When we show up for people, deliver for people, people show up and deliver for us. And that's what you have shown us right now. So know this, Tanya. We're going to do everything in our power, including being the first contender for the Democratic nomination to show up in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So bring the focus and the attention to these races, these opportunities, these incredibly fine leaders who not only portend a brighter future for the Commonwealth, but as you showed us in 2017 and what we made possible in Texas and other parts of the country in 2018, you are setting the stage and the standard for 2020, defeating Donald Trump and bringing this country together around our shared challenges and opportunities. So here's what I will do in return for your patience and for the fact that you've shown up here for us, and then I came about 8 minutes late from our scheduled arrival time. Without going into a long stem-winder of a speech on every single issue, I'll use this time more productively by listening to you, answering your questions if you have them for me, responding to your ideas, your suggestion, your guidance on the things that matter most to the people of Prince William County, of the Commonwealth of Virginia, of this country. So Cynthia Cano, who is in the Beto 2020 shirt, has got a microphone. She will bring that to you. Tanya, thank you for organizing this, bringing us out, to each of you for your attendance. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes,
Thank you.
Deanna Bayer here, and I have one that's a quick question and then a follow-up. I think that every candidate for president of the United States, and I'm sure you've read the Constitution, but I want to know if you read the Federalist Papers. And then the Social Security system. And why can't we tax up through to $1 million at least of income?
Yeah. So great question. So yes, I've read the Constitution. Yes, read the Federalist Papers. It's been a long time, so I don't know that I can quote Federalist 10 to you verbatim. But what an interesting time in our country that we had come together, drawn up this Constitution, and now had to help compel our fellow Americans to vote for it, and to describe why we had the representative form of government, why we had some common cause and should not be separate states. So some of the most compelling rhetoric, language ever used in American history that again, not only defined our ideals, but as we're trying to do in 2019, won an election essentially to make sure that the Constitution was ratified. Your second question was on Social Security. Here's the quick answer to this one. Social Security will not be able to pay out 100% of its obligations to working Americans who paid into it every day of their lives as soon as the 2030s. So maybe 12, 15 years away, unless we do something to fortify that program and our compact with one another. The easiest way to do this, right now there's an arbitrary cap on the amount of income upon which you pay Social Security taxes into the trust fund. I believe it's at $129,000 today. So every dollar, every $1 million, every $1 billion more that you make does not contribute to our shared success. If we lift that cap, and I supported as a member of Congress a bill known as the Social Security 2100 Act, which does just that. It ensures the viability of that program well into the next century. As president, I will sign that into law. Thank you for the question. Hey.
Hi, Salonia Mountain.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a two-part question. As we see under the current administration, we've taken a lot of hits with our agencies, most specifically the Department of Education and also HUD. And this is very dear to me because in the town of Dumfries, we are experiencing a growing homeless rate. We did have policies in place under the previous secretary to lead to a path of home ownership, and there were access to affordable housing. Once you are elected, how do you plan on restoring those policies? And not only that, is there a way that we can make up for those people who are falling through the cracks now so that we can have them in stable housing?
Absolutely, Councilmember. Thank you for the question. Thank you for hosting us here today. All of this stuff is connected in my mind. We talk about housing. I sat for 6 years on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Too many homeless veterans still today in this country. Tanya, understand you served in uniform to this country. Those like you who put their lives on the line for this country earned the ability to have a roof over their heads, care at the VA at a time that more than 20 veterans a day, every day, are taking their lives. Access to mental health care providers, to an earned post 9/11 GI Bill benefit. And the consequence, if we fail to do that, is more veterans who are homeless. Under the Obama administration, they led through the Housing and Urban Development Department a program called the HUD-VASH voucher that partnered with local housing authorities to provide housing and a permanent home for those who had served our country. When I also look at another challenge, our criminal justice system that has produced the largest prison population on the face of the planet, disproportionately comprised of color, too many there for nonviolent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana, which I would much prefer someone use instead of an opioid to which they can become addicted, overdose, and die from. When they're released, we know they have to check a box on every employment application form showing that they have a conviction, making it less likely that they get the job. We know they no longer qualify for federally backed student loans, meaning they cannot improve themselves through higher education. Their choices are constrained, their future is narrowed, and far too many end up on the streets. I heard about a champion for the LGBTQ community. We know disproportionately young homeless people are members of the LGBTQ community who are not able to stay in their homes, forced out in some cases, found no support or social services there for them, and are struggling right now. So not only must we fund HUD and housing authorities to their full complement, not only must we expand Section 8 so that people aren't paying 50 or 80% of their income for housing, but we must also fully fund mental health care in this country so no one goes to jail because they're schizophrenic or bipolar. It's the one place that they can get treatment today. we must also make sure that we understand, this was brought home to us in Houston, Texas. We met some folks who were living under a bridge, and I asked about what they're seeing around them. They talk about a high prevalence of illegal drug use, and I wrongly assumed that's what brought them to the streets. They said, no, they're on the streets, they cannot access health care, and illegal drugs are the one kind of care that they can get right now to make life temporarily bearable for them. So universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, expanding our housing programs so it is affordable everywhere, partnering with cities, which are on the front line with community development block grants, which we have seen all over this country, including in Columbia, South Carolina with Mayor Benjamin, who turned those grants into housing that is affordable for his community at a time that people were being priced out of their neighborhoods. There's a way to do this, but we've got to follow your lead at the local level, and as president, you have my commitment to do that. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Marilyn Carp. So I think the single biggest problem that's facing us today is the environment, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are about how we are going to save our planet.
Thank you. When we were on the trail in Texas, I remember being in a very small West Texas Republican rural community, and a farmer walked in, and she had brought her kids with her to the meeting, and she said, look, I've never come to one of these, and I did not expect my first one to be with a Democrat. But I'm showing up because I live on the same farm that my grandparents lived on, that my parents lived on, but what they planted and grew, we're planting right now, and it is not growing. She said, climate change is not something that I've got to prepare these kids for. It is something that is happening to us at this minute. The droughts that we saw in West Texas and in the Panhandle, in some cases lasted for 5 years. Scientists tell us that those droughts are caused by our own emissions and our own inaction in the face of the science. The flooding that we are hearing about in Charleston, South Carolina, or the 2 500-year floods that hit North Carolina within just 2 years, or the 58 inches of rain that fell on Houston, Texas, which is the landfall record for as long as we've been keeping them in North America. It happened just in 2017 and was the third 500-year flood in Southeast Texas. The fires raging across Northern California. These acts of devastation that consume property and human life are not acts of nature alone. They are acts of humankind. We know that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980. We know that it will continue to warm along this current trajectory, and those droughts and fires and floods and storms will become exponentially worse. And I share with anyone who's concerned about 400,000 apprehensions on our southern border with Mexico. Many of those farmers who are leaving places that are in drought in the northern triangle of Central America right now. Wait until some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life, because that is exactly what is going to happen. And then you will have a crisis on your hands. The competition for resources, the ability to live where we are right now, whether it's next to the ocean or in the desert Southwest, we will undermine this civilization and the generations that follow unless we take action today. So we must reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. We must get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as humanly possible. We must invest in renewable energy and technologies. Not only is that wind and solar, but through the Farm Bill, providing an incentive and allowing for a profit for farmers to plant cover crops to absorb more carbon out of the air, investing in technologies like precision tilling that disturb less of the carbon that is in the soil. Every one of us doing our part, and also reaffirming our rightful role as the indispensable nation, re-signing the Paris Climate Agreement, and convening the powers of the planet to do everything that we can while we still can. So thank you for raising this. Appreciate it.
Andrea Bailey, I'm one of the candidates here in this area. My question is, when we look at elections, our power as women speaks for itself. If we believe in you, we vote for you. So my question to you, my friend, is how are you going to use that voting power in your administration to make a difference in our governing power?
Thank you. I mentioned the inspiration that we found here in Virginia. that continued in Alabama, where the victories and the gains were led by women and led specifically by women of color. We found the same to be true in Texas. Though we came up a little bit short in our own race, we helped to bring a state that was 50th in voter turnout. By design, because people were drawn out of congressional districts based on their race and their ethnicity, and that's not me saying it. The courts in 2017 affirmed that that was the case and demanded that Texas change its racist gerrymandering to allow more people to vote. So we had our work cut out for us. We really had some challenges in a state that had been so reliably red that it had been 30 years since 1988 and Lloyd Benson that a Democrat had been elected to the United States Senate. Not only did we go everywhere, not only did we not write anybody off, we made sure that our campaign reflected the genius and the diversity of Texas. We don't just tolerate, we embrace our differences because we understand that they make us stronger. Though we did not win, Colin Allred in North Texas is now a new member of Congress, a Democrat, in a seat long held by Republicans. Lizzie Panel Fletcher in the Houston area, a new Democrat in Congress, replacing a Republican. We helped to flip the House of Representatives, which, by the way, just passed universal background checks because of that new majority. And then perhaps the best part of 2018 in Texas is that in Houston, Texas, Harris County, the largest city in our state, the most diverse city in the United States of America, 17 African American women just won judicial positions of power and trust, changing the face of criminal justice in that community, and by extension, our state and our country. So that's the way that we have campaigned. That's where we've seen success around the country. In our administration, we will reflect where that success is, because success is not just winning elections. It's not just defeating Donald Trump, as important as that is. It's delivering on universal health care, on immigration reform, on an economy that works for everybody, on combating climate change before it is too late, and we cannot do it by half measure or by half the country. We will need all of us, our power brought to bear on these challenges. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Mr. O'Rourke, thank you. Chairman of the Democratic Black Caucus of Virginia. You gave one of the most eloquent defenses of Colin Kaepernick's kneeling that I've heard, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
However, I have not heard anything about what you would do or how you would proceed to stop, well, the reason that he kneeled with African Americans being killed by police officers. So I would like to hear what you have to say on that subject.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. Thank you for acknowledging some of what we've done so far to bring attention on a problem that we have in this country. Unarmed fellow Americans, people of color, killed by those entrusted to serve and protect all of us. The specific remedy to this in the short term or in the immediate aftermath is accountability and transparency for use of force and against whom that force is used, tying federal support to local sheriff's departments and police departments to their ability to be forthcoming, to prosecute wrongful use of force, and to use the full weight of this country's civil rights laws to make these federal matters, if they are not resolved at the local, county, or state level. But the larger problem, of which our criminal justice system is just a part, is the very racist foundation of this country. The fact that the wealth of the United States of America, the Commonwealth of Virginia, was built literally on the backs of those kidnapped in their home countries, transported in the Middle Passage to this country, and who had no hope or prospect of enjoying the fruits of their labor, and who had insult to injury their descendants up until the year 2019 through segregation, Jim Crow, suppression, redlining, the disproportionate arrest of African Americans for possession of marijuana, though all races use it at the same rate in this country. All of that has been reinforced and compounded and leads to these results. Not only unarmed black men being killed in this country, sometimes functionally with impunity, but 10 times the wealth in white America that there is in black America today. Disparities in maternal Mortality rates 3 times as deadly for women of color. Disparities in infant mortality, a rate greater today between white and black America than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. So if we limit ourselves to only looking at police officers and sheriff's deputies, the vast majority of whom do a very fine job of upholding these laws and serving with honor and distinction, if we only look at the entire criminal justice system, the mandatory minimums, the for-profit prisons, then we will fail to see this is every part of our country. Our education system, where a child of 5 years old in a kindergarten classroom is 5 times more likely to be disciplined if she or he is a child of color. It is our healthcare system. It is everything that matters, including the system that underpins our success as a country, our democracy. I mentioned Texas at the outset, 50th in voter turnout, because we've literally locked people out of the ballot box. You can use your ID to carry a firearm in Texas to prove who you are at the ballot box. You cannot use your student ID at Texas Southern University or the University of Texas at El Paso to prove who you are at the ballot box. So how do we fix this? We end the war on drugs, which has been a war on people in some communities specifically. We end for-profit prisons. We end the cash bail system in this country. We attract more teachers who look like the students before them in the classroom. We have universal health care that understands and recognizes the disparity in treatment, even when people can get access to a clinic. We make sure that we understand the consequences of slavery and segregation and continuing suppression in this country, so we can begin the work of repair and stop visiting these injustices on future generations. It is a tall order, but I know that this country is up to it. No one person, no one party. It's got to be this country having this conversation. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Barbara Larimore. I introduced myself as a stay-at-home mom, and I just wanted to ask you a question. In Northern Virginia, it is a luxury to have a stay-at-home parent. And so we live our lives and chug along, and you never really anticipate the unexpected happening. So my husband last year got cancer. And so, I was looking into what now? If the worst happens, what do I do?
Take your time, because we are all with you, and we're all sending you as much power as we possibly can, some strength. Everything good. Take your time.
Thank you. So, looking into it, I have a degree in psychology, which, as most people know, doesn't pay a whole lot. And so, working with special needs and at-risk youth, you're barely making more than minimum wage. So I was looking at, the options. Do I send my kids to daycare, and with the job that I would be able to get, barely be breaking even? So my heart goes out to people who have to make these choices, and my husband, thank God, is okay after a year of craziness. But do you have a plan for making childcare more affordable for working families?
Yes. Thank you for having the courage of sharing your story to make this case and to make it personal and ensure that we all connect, that it's not an abstraction. These aren't numbers. These are our fellow human beings. It's you. It's other families around this Commonwealth and around this country. One of the perverse ironies of our current system of childcare in this country is that childcare workers who are taking care of kids so that other parents can work themselves cannot afford childcare and maybe working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. They're probably the same parents of kids who on the first day of kindergarten are 10 months back in reading comprehension because their parents literally did not have the luxury of reading to them. No one should pass any judgment on any parent in this country. Too many are trying too hard and are coming up short because the deck is stacked against them. When in some states, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, it means that you cannot work full-time or even overtime at one job. You have to, by definition, take on multiple jobs to provide for that child. So as with so many of these other issues, so many different things intersect here at once. A higher minimum wage, a fight for 15 that we win so everyone just has to work one job is fundamental to this. Paid family leave is critical as well. Universal all-day pre-K, so that education starts not at 4 or 5 years old, but 3 or 4 years old. would not only ensure that that child has a better chance of graduating from high school, pursuing higher education, earning more over her lifetime, doing more great things for the rest of us, it also frees up that child's parents to do their part, live to their full potential. Tax credits for childcare that help working families afford what too many working families cannot afford today, expanding what's there. Bless you. Community development block grants, which I mentioned to the council member, are important not just for housing, not just for infrastructure, but can help with childcare as well. Some of these grants proposed to be zeroed out in this current president's administration. All of this is critical if our families are going to be healthy, if adults in this country can work and live to their full potential, and if we're going to create a brighter future for that next generation coming up. So you've got my commitment on those principles and policies. Thank you for asking.
We're time for a few more, and then the last one from Ms. James.
Elizabeth Michelson, Democratic Immigrant Caucus. You and I both had a chance to see Tornillo Child Prison before it was dismantled, and many of those children are now at Homestead, Florida. They have a projection of expanding Homestead, Florida to about 3,800 beds. And we know that the headquarters for the parent company is very close to us here in Alexandria and Reston. What are some of the other things I can do other than lobbying on the Hill like I've been doing? What can we activists here on the eastern end of the country do to prevent child separations and to prevent for-profit prisons for our brothers and sisters that come from the southern border?
What you are doing already has produced some of the positive change that we've already seen. So when you came to Tornillo, when others came to bear witness, to testify to their fellow Americans, what was being done in this country's name? Taking kids from their parents by force at their most vulnerable moment after they'd made a 2,000-mile journey. Most of us, maybe all of us, I hope, can only imagine what that is like, because hopefully we have not experienced it. But you have to put yourself in those parents' shoes and ask what would compel you to do the same thing, only if it were the only way to save your child's life. And that is true for these parents and for those kids. And so when they get here, not speaking the language, not a dime in their pockets, strangers in a strange land, a land of refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers, to have that child stripped from your breast in some cases, taken from you by force in many cases, that child put in a cage, that mother deported back to the very country she fled, in some cases the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today. Your willingness to come out to Tornillo, which was not chosen by accident. It's 2 flights to get to El Paso, and it's an hour and a half to drive to Tornillo. They put them out of the way in the Chihuahuan Desert, where it's going to get to 110 degrees plus in a couple of months on purpose. And they were hoping that we wouldn't notice, and you did, and you showed up. I remember on Father's Day, more than 1,000 came from all over this country in the wake of this prison camp going up for kids. And you know what it did? It got the Trump administration to at least temporarily change their zero tolerance policy, where they were taking 100% of the kids who showed up with their parents. But the work, as you just said, is not done. There's still kids in detention. There's still families not reunited. And that is a continuing torture visited upon these children. For those who have degrees in psychology, and then just for me who've seen those families when they are lucky enough to be reunited, the damage is already done to those kids. On their faces, no smiles, no tears of joy, no impatience to connect with that mother again, just a vacant look, because they associate mom now with the worst pain they have ever felt that perhaps a human can ever feel. And they don't want to open themselves up to that again. So this is being done in our name. It continues to be done in our name. It may very well get worse with some of the things that the president has threatened to do. What his attorney general is doing right now, trying to keep migrants indefinitely detained without being able to post bond to get out, though we know they pose no threat to us from a public health or public safety perspective. This follows the rhetoric of calling asylum seekers animals or an infestation, Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, Muslims as too dangerous to allow into this country. Klansmen as very fine people. It's not just the rhetoric, it's not just the words, it's not just posting that video of Representative Ilhan Omar and conflating her with the terrorists from 9/11. It is the violence and the policies and the dehumanization and the torture that follows. So please keep doing what you're doing. It is working. It's not going to be enough though until we can change the composition of the Commonwealth's legislature, of the United States Senate, and the current occupant in the White House. So I'm going to do everything I can. You're going to do everything you can. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to you. I'm going to go here, one more back there, and then Ms. James.
Out of respect for the office you're running for, I'm going to stand.
Thank you.
I know that you want to represent me, which means you want to see me and you want to hear me, unlike the guy that's occupying that office right now.
Right.
So my friend Elizabeth already touched on the Latino and immigrant issue, so I'm going to bring it to the LGBTQ issue. First of all, the trans ban.
Yeah.
I think that is a waste of our money and our resources. The transgender people that serve us right now have been serving us for a while and have been trained appropriately. They have been in that position of power, of influence, and also be able to do their job efficiently because they have that experience. And we're going to just throw them out because of that. So that's just the bigger picture of another picture of LGBTQ people. Here in Prince William County, I've been addressing people that represent us about accepting the LGBTQ community when our own Human Rights Commission doesn't want to recognize LGBTQ people as well, because we have supremacists and racists serving on that commission as well as our Board of County Supervisors. What are you going to do once you get into that seat to help protect us and help make right what went wrong? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your advocacy for the question. You know, at every turn in this country's armed forces, there have been those who say if we integrate the armed forces based on race, it's just gonna it's gonna make us weaker. The country's gonna fall apart. The sky is gonna fall. We now know, with the perspective of history, that it made us stronger and better, and we have the greatest all-volunteer armed forces on the face of the planet right now. When people said, as recently as the Clinton administration, that LGBTQ Americans serving in the armed forces will make us weaker, less safe. People were tearing their hair out, gnashing their teeth. It turns out that when we didn't discriminate based on sexual orientation, it made the armed forces stronger. When people said the same thing based on gender, we defied them by integrating the armed forces regardless of gender. It made us stronger. And so I kind of thought, though the pace was too slow, though I was very frustrated by don't ask, don't tell in the 1990s, at least we were moving in the right direction, inexorably, sometimes too slowly. The election of Donald Trump to the White House has proven me wrong. That not only can progress stall, it can be reversed. We don't know how many transgender service members have paid the ultimate price and lost their lives in service to this country. We don't know how many more Americans' lives they have saved in their service. And yet, this president turns his back, and by extension the country's back, on their service and their sacrifice by disallowing transgender service members to continue to serve. So, day one, we reversed that executive order and welcomed transgender service members into the military. We acknowledge that in the Commonwealth, in the state of Texas, and far too many places in this country, it is legal to discriminate based on sexual orientation. You can be fired in Texas for being gay. You can be refused the ability to adopt a child out of the foster care system based on your sexual orientation. So we cannot allow Virginia or Texas or any state to accept itself from its responsibility to all of us, to our foundational principle that we're all created equal. We got to walk that talk in the Declaration of Independence. And so, as president, I will sign into law the Equality Act, which guarantees the full civil rights of every single American, and we will speak with pride about all of us. So, in the policies and the bills that we sign, in the executive orders, and in the language that we use, we will be proud. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Hi.
Hi, my name is Sharon Music. As an activist in Prince William County, we know that we need to flip our Board of County Supervisors blue. We also need to flip our House of Delegates blue
Yes.
for the Commonwealth of Virginia. What you created, the community and the movement and the inspiration that you created in Texas, we need to replicate that here. We need to do more. Can you talk a little inside baseball and explain how to expand the electorate? What can we do to do what you did?
I gotta tell you, I'm flattered that you would ask that question because as I said at the outset, we took a lot of heart from Virginia and what you had accomplished from these victories that we saw here, Delegate Ayala, Delegate Rome, who we just met. I mean, that changed the world in this country and what was now thought to be politically possible. You know, Alabama, who would have thought it would have elected a Democratic senator? And yet it did. And so when people said we were nuts to try to run in Texas, I knew it was possible. You know, we were going to follow your lead. And for us, you know, I mentioned going to every county, never writing anybody off. So the language that we use about one another follows this excellent question. Regardless of who you voted for last time, to whom you pray, who you love, whether you've been here for 10 generations or you just got here 10 days ago, we wanted to demonstrate profound respect, always engage. If there were people protesting our visit, we very often give them the microphone and say, you know, you don't agree with me on universal background checks and banning assault weapons? Let's hear your solution to ending a scourge of gun violence that has claimed more than 30,000 lives. I'm open to the conversation. And I tell you what, so many times people came up to us and said, you know, I'm a lifelong Republican, but for the first time I'm contemplating voting for a Democrat. Folks came up to us and said, I'm going to vote for Ted Cruz, okay? So no offense, but I got to tell you, it just got to me that you showed up in Abilene, Texas, because no one ever comes to Abilene, Texas. And so 500,000 of my fellow Texans voted for Greg Abbott, who's a very conservative Tea Party Republican governor, but also on the same ballot voted for me, without me ever trimming my sails on LGBTQ rights or the Equality Act or reproductive rights and expanding access to illegal abortion and cervical cancer screenings and family planning help and a provider to universal high quality health care to immigration. We said all those things everywhere, the reddest of places, the bluest of counties. And I gotta think that's how we got so close, helped others to get over the line. The reason that we're here right now in the Commonwealth is because of your elections in 2019. Talking to the leaders, and not just elected leaders, leaders at the community level, they're saying, look, Beto, I know that you care beyond being the nominee. You want to defeat Trump and bring this country together. That road begins here in Virginia because our election is 2019. It will literally set the stage and the path going forward. So you've got my commitment to continue to come back and do my best for all these amazing candidates. Thank you.
One more before we let Ms. James wrap it up. We have one of the owners here of
Julie.
the restaurant.
Yes.
¿Por qué ha decidido venir aquí a Virginia?
Yo quiero ayudar a qué está pasando aquí en las elecciones en 2017, que fue una inspiración para que hicimos en Texas y la importancia de 2019, porque allí es el futuro de este país. En cada reto en que queremos enfrentar el cambio climático, la reforma migratoria, cuidado de salud por todos, yo sé que no podemos hacerlo si podemos contar cada voto, podemos escuchar cada voz, incluyendo los votos y los voces aquí en Virginia. Y quiero agregar además un cosa más, y voy a explicar en inglés. Growing up, my parents, it was a rule at our dinner table that we would never eat Mexican food outside of El Paso. And so I'm going to be so happy to call my mom today and say, Mom, even though I was in Virginia, I ate Mexican food in El Paso. Thank you for hosting us here today. Very, very grateful, Julie, and to Danielle as well. Yes, gracias.
All right, this is our last question.
Thank you. Beto, I know that you have been a champion for veterans, veterans' rights, veterans' affairs, veterans' issues throughout your time in Congress. I know that I knew that when you were in Congress, when I was still in uniform. I just retired in January 2016, so as the world was changing, so was my life. And also during that time, started getting calls from Marines that I, pretty much grew up with me in the Marine Corps, trying to get into the VA. I know you spoke earlier about veteran homelessness, but the thing that haunts me and the thing that pushes me every day is because I still have so many of those young Marines who are now senior leaders having to deal with and having to find ways to get their Marines, as well as friends who are not in the uniform, trying to get in the VA because they are dealing with PTSD and TBIs. And there's been a couple of times where they've tried to get in and couldn't get in, and then it was too late. So for me, that is probably one of my number one issues in the 2020 cycle is who's going to be that champion for those most vulnerable veterans.
Thank you for asking the question. And thank you for your service to the country. And this is something that I have learned from every veteran and military retiree that I've met, yourself included. That service does not end once you're out of uniform. At every town hall that I've been to, including this one, when I was a member of Congress, veterans were at the microphone advocating not for themselves in their own lives, but advocating for veterans in the community and future veterans who were still enlisted, who had yet to transition into civilian life. And when I first took office in 2013, El Paso had the longest wait times of any VA to see a mental health care provider. Veterans were not waiting hours or days, they were waiting months, sometimes years, to get in to see somebody. But we focused on that problem, turned it around from 68 full-time mental health care staff at the El Paso VA to now just under 120, more appointments, better outcomes, more lives saved in a country that is losing veterans at the rate of 20 a day, every single day. Those 20 by their own hand, 16 of those 20 unable or unwilling, perhaps because of the lines, to get in to see a provider that could literally save their lives. We were talking about criminal justice earlier, and not only are far too many people serving time for marijuana, but veterans have come to meetings like these and told me that they are buying heroin on the street because they were prescribed an opioid at the VA, to which they became addicted with no alternative counseling or help or the ability for that provider to prescribe medicinal cannabis to alleviate the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury or the signature conditions and wounds of service and combat. And yet the executives of Purdue Pharma, who sold these opioids to prescribers and doctors around the country as a miracle painkiller that was not addictive, though it appears though they knew something to the contrary, not one of them have spent a single night in jail or faced any consequence of any significance. So to invoke the words of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, talking about our role around the world, those who carry that responsibility on their backs, the women and men who have borne the battle, when they come back to this country, we should be willing to bear any burden, pay any price to make sure that they are cared for, they have a roof over their heads, they can continue with their lives and do not fall through the cracks. I will make sure that we fund the VA, can measure it with the need that is there. You may not know this, there are 45,000 positions, unfilled, clinical positions at the VA today. Those lines are a reflection of our inability to prioritize those who have served this country. I want to make sure that not only do we not repeat that mistake, not only do we fund the VA to the appropriate levels, but these wars that produce the veterans who need the care, our 18th year in Afghanistan, our 28th year in Iraq, but an authorization for the use of military force passed in 2001 that underpins our presence in Syria and Somalia and Yemen and Libya as well. Let's bring these service members back home to their communities and their families. Let's end these wars. Let's make sure that we do right by those who serve this country. Thank you for your service. Thank you all for having us out. Gracias.
All right, I'm going to get a group picture of everybody. Everybody's going to look at me. Here we go. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, that is perfect.
Or we could get the security camera.
All right, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, hold it. I'm gonna do one more with my phone. Here we go. Count of 3, 1, 2, big smiles. Very nice, got it. Thank you guys.